Hello students, welcome you to English Literature Pathshala. This is my second video on the age of Romanticism. Yesterday I uploaded one video on age of Romanticism, so this lecture is in continuation of that. In the previous video lecture I discussed the beginning of the Romantic revival movement, some significant definitions of Romanticism, and also the influences, like how French Revolution wielded a considerable influence on the Romantic movement, and how precursors of the Romantic movement sowed the seeds of Romanticism. Now in this video lecture I'll discuss the salient features of this movement, which started in the closing part of the 19th century and the closing part of the 18th century and the early part of the 19th century. Now this movement was a widespread movement. In Germany we find it in the writings of Schiller and Goethe. In France we have Victor Hugo. In America we have Walt Whitman and Edgar Allan Poe, and in England we have six important poets: Wordsworth, Coleridge and Robert Southey. Generally we club them in the group which is named as elder romantics, and sometimes they are also called lake poets. So we have these three poets: elder generation of the Romantic poets, William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Robert Southey. Then we have younger generation of the Romantic poets: P.B. Shelley, John Keats and Lord Byron. So they are the significant poets, and this was a kind of widespread movement all across the world. Now what are the important features of this movement, this age of Romanticism, or the Romantic poetry of the early 19th century? Now if you read Preface to the Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth, then you will find out how does how he explains the basic tenets of Romanticism. What are the chief qualities of the Romantic poetry? And most of you must have studied Preface to the Lyrical Ballads in your course. Now let me tell you some important features of the Romantic movement with the help of some important lines from the different poems written by the Romantic poets. Number one is emphasis on emotion, imagination and spontaneity. This is very important, that the Romantic poets laid stress on emotions, feelings, imagination and spontaneity. Now as I told you in my previous lecture that this movement started with the publication of Lyrical Ballads in 1798. Lyrical Ballads, a joint venture of Wordsworth and Coleridge. This collection of poems contains 23 poems, 19 of Wordsworth and 4 of Coleridge, which were thematically, content-wise and language-wise different from the neoclassical pattern. Now this the first and the foremost, the first important characteristic of Romantic poetry is that the Romantic poets laid stress on feeling, emotion, imagination and spontaneity. Now if you just read the neoclassical poetry, in neoclassical poetry the stress is always there on wit and reason, and that is why neoclassical age is called the age of prose and reason. In this context, I am reminded of one of the important couplets of Alexander Pope, which describes the importance of wit and reason. The couplet is, "True wit is nature, to advantage dressed, what oft was thought, but ne'er so well expressed. Importance is, not on the content but on the manner. Now you see, Wordsworth says in his preface to the lyrical ballads that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotions recollected in tranquility. So romantic poets laid stress on feeling, emotion, imagination, and spontaneity. Now, if Augustan age is known for its satire, and that is we always say Augustan was a satire. Now, much of the satire of 18th century was directed against fancy. You see, fancy and imagination actually did not have their role in 18th century writing. So, the satire was against fancy. Now, if you read Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, now in the fourth book of Gulliver's Travels, Swift chastises yahoos for being creatures of impulse. On the other hand, other characters, hohums, are glorified because they are the characters of reason, because they were endowed with reason. So you see, most of the poetry of 18th century focused on wit, reason, and this romantic poetry laid a stress on feelings, emotions, imagination, and spontaneity. Now, number two is love for the past, especially Middle Ages. Now, romantic poetry, in the poetry of romantic poets, we find strong fascination for Greek art and culture, for the past, for the Middle Ages. Now, you see, why are they actually indulging in the past or indulging in Greek art and culture? Because you see, they are not satisfied with the existing society, and in some cases of romantic poets, we find that they are escapists because they want to escape themselves from the sordid reality of life. The best example is of John Keats, and read his poem Ode to the Nightingale, where you will find out the way the poet expresses his dissatisfaction with the temporariness of the life. He wants to escape himself from the sordid reality of the world. The line is the weariness, the fever, and the fret, where youth grows pale and a spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow. Now, the life is like this. So most of the poets, they try to escape themselves from the sordid realities of the life, and they are going to the past, they're going to the Greek art and culture. Now, it is so much so that, Keats was a great admirer of Greek art and culture, the Hellenic culture, and that is why whenever we describe Keats, we always describe the Hellenism of Keats. Shelley once said about Keats that Keats is a Greek. It does not mean that Keats belongs to Greece, but it means that in the poetry of Keats, we have the abundant use of Greek art and culture, his fondness for Greek art and culture. Now, you see, when you talk about past, when you talk about the Middle Ages, then you can take the example of Endymion, you can take the example of Lamia, you can take the example of Grecian urn. Now, most of the allusions of Greek art and culture are there in Ode to the Nightingale also. Now, if you read the poetry of Lord Byron, now his poem Isles of Greece is basically based on the appreciation of Greeks. Most of the Romantic poets basically indulge in the past. They glorify Greek art and culture. Their nature is basically Hellenic. Coming to the third important feature, an addition of strangeness to beauty. I think this is the definition also, which I told you in my previous lecture. This is a third important feature of Romantic poetry, an addition of strangeness to beauty. Now, in Biographia Literaria, which is a critical work by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Now, in chapter 14th of Biographia Literaria, Coleridge describes the plan of lyrical ballads. He said that when we were to write the poems for lyrical ballads, I, along with Wordsworth, sat and started discussing the kind of poems we are going to write. So there was a kind of agreement said that I'll take uncommon subjects and will try to make them common. And Wordsworth said that I'll take common subjects and will try to make them uncommon. Now, in the poetry of William Wordsworth, we find how common objects, how ordinary objects are given the extraordinary touch. I'll take one example from William Wordsworth, the poem The Solitary Reaper. Maybe you have read it in your course, that this poem, The Solitary Reaper, is the story of a reaper, a lady which cutting the crop and singing a song. The song is so mesmeric that Wordsworth was wrapped in the song. And the poem begins, and she's all alone in the field. Behold her single in the field. This is the line, the way the poem begins. Behold her single in the field. Song is so melodious that Wordsworth says that even the song of the nightingale is not so melodious as the song of this lady. And the line is, no nightingale did ever chant, no nightingale did ever chant more welcome notes to the weary bands. And then, he compares her with the heroine of the Middle Ages. Now, how common objects are given the extraordinary touch by Wordsworth in the poem The Solitary Reaper. So, this is a very important quality of the Romantic poetry. Now, fourth important quality is love for freedom and liberty. Now, you see, I told you that French Revolution wielded a considerable influence on the Romantic poets. And the slogan of a French Revolution was equality, fraternity, and liberty. Now, so this quality, love for freedom and liberty, is one of the important qualities of Romantic poets. Now read Ode to the West Wind. I am trying to take the examples from those poems which I feel you must have studied in your course. In Ode to the West Wind, there is a line, I fall upon the thorns of life I bleed. I fall upon the thorns of life I bleed. A heavy weight of ours has churred and bowed. One too like thee, tameless and swift and proud. Look at the lines. I fall upon the thorns of life I bleed. A heavy weight of ours has chained and bound. One too like thee. I just want to become like you. Tameless, swift and proud. This is, love for freedom and liberty. Next comes a discard for rules and conventions. Neoclassical age is known for rules and regulations. They were strictly following the rules laid down by the classical writers. since they were following the rules and regulations of the classical writers, and that is why they are called the neo-classical writers, though imitation always remains an imitation, and that is why sometimes they are called pseudo-classical writers, because this is a kind of false false show of being the classical writers. Now, so discard of romantic poets never followed rules and regulations. Now then comes love for nature. In romantic poetry, we find that poets are the great votary of nature, great worshippers of nature. Rousseau's concept of back to nature is very much there in the romantic poets, and we find in the poetry of William Wordsworth the concept of return to nature. And we have almost the religious conviction of these poets in nature. Now, there is a poem, "The World is Too Much With Us" by William Wordsworth. In that poem, Wordsworth is very much dissatisfied with the attitude of English people, because they have become very materialistic and they are not concerned about nature. So he says that people have become very materialistic. The world is too much with us. That is, we are too much involved in worldly affairs, and we are not concerned about nature, something which is very close to us. He says, I will better become a pagan and non-Christian, because I don't like these Christian people who do not, love nature. Now, these days we are talking about eco-criticism. I mean, how literature is related to ecology, and this nature poetry of 19th century played a very important role in that. Now, in that particular poem, "The World is Too Much With Us," Wordsworth says, "The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our parts. Little we see in nature that is ours." So Wordsworth says that, little we see in nature that is ours. Now, Wordsworth was a great votary of nature, and he finds the divine presence in nature. And you see, there is a word called pantheism. Wordsworth was a great pantheist, and when we say pantheism, meaning is that if we find divine presence in nature, this is a kind of pantheist philosophy. If you read Tintern Abbey by William Wordsworth, in that particular poem, he says, I have felt a presence that disturbs me with a joy. I have felt a presence that disturbs me with a joy. Now, Wordsworth spiritualizes nature, Shelley intellectualizes nature, and Keats feels it with his senses. Keats is a great, sensuous poet. Now, Wordsworth in another context says that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. Nature never did betray heart that loved her. And you see, most of Wordsworth's poems are devoted to nature. He said, "Let nature be your teacher. Let nature be your teacher. One impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good, than all the sages can." So nature has the educating power. Nature is a teacher. Now, the poem "The Nightingale" by Coleridge is also about nature. Now, then we have the glorification of the childhood. Now, in romantic poetry, childhood plays a very important role. The poems are there on children, and how romantic poets are glorifying the childhood. No need to go anywhere else. Just read Immortality Ode by William Wordsworth. In the poem Immortality Ode, we find the way Wordsworth is trying to glorify the childhood. Now, next is supernaturalism. Supernatural Supernaturalism is another very important quality of romantic poetry, and whenever we describe romantic poets, we say that for supernatural poetry, read the poetry of Coleridge. Coleridge is known for supernatural poetry. There are certain poems by Keats also. Like, for example, if you read La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, there is a kind of supernatural touch there. Read The Ancient Mariner by Coleridge. Read Kubla Khan by Coleridge. Read Christabel by Coleridge. We'll find the supernatural touch. So in the poetry of Coleridge, we have naturalized supernaturalism. We have naturalized supernaturalism. When we come to the next important feature, again, related to the supernatural point is that if you read some of the important novels of this period, we have Gothic novels which are written during Romantic age, and we have the supernatural elements in the novels of Horace Walpole and Radcliffe, Monk Lewis, William Beckford. So they are the Gothic novelists. So we have the supernatural elements in the writing which were written during Romantic poetry. Now then comes subjectivity, individualism, free expression. Now you see, individualism is a very important quality of Romantic poetry, because they were independent from the bondages of customs, rules and regulations, and that is why Victor Hugo calls Romanticism as liberalism in literature. Now another quality is lyricism. You see, most of the poems written by Romantic poets are very lyrical. Read any poem, you'll find out the lyrical effect, the spontaneity there. Now coming to the next important quality, use of common characters and common language. Characters are common, characters from the common life, and the language also of the common people. I'll take the example from Preface to the Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth. Now, in Preface to the Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth says, actually, in Preface to the Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth attacks the diction used by 18th century writers. Now, 18th century neoclassical writers were very fond of using, ornamental, highly embellished language. Wordsworth is against that. He calls it gaudiness and inane phraseology of many modern writers. This is the line which he uses in Preface to the Lyrical Ballads. Gaudiness and inane phraseology of many modern writers. He says that poetic diction of 18th century is very gaudy, very showy, no way related to the common people. He says, I'll bring my language near to the language of men. He says, I'll choose, in Preface to the Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth says, to choose incidents and situations from common life. This is a line from Preface. To choose incidents and situations from common life. And then he says, humble and rustic life is chosen. So characters in the Romantic poets are from the common life. Take the example of Lucy Gray, for example, or Solitary Reaper. They are the very common characters. And the language in the Daffodils, in the Solitary Reaper, in the other poems is also the language of the common people. Now, you see, in 18th century, people were very fond of figurative language and all that. And here I am reminded of one of the statements of Thomas Gray. Though he was a precursor of the Romantic movement, but he was also a champion of some of the neoclassical qualities, especially the poetic diction. He was a master of poetic diction. And Thomas Gray once said, the language of age can never be the language of poetry. The language of age can never be the language of poetry. And Wordsworth, in response to that, says, I'll bring my language near to the language of men. Men means common men. Next comes variety of stanza forms. Now, when you read neoclassical poetry, we have only one stanza form. You must have studied The Rape of the Lock. It is written in heroic couplet. There is only one stanza form available, that was heroic couplet. In Romantic poetry, we have variety because they were free. Okay, they could choose any kind of stanza forms. So they selected many stanza forms. For example, a Spenserian stanza is there, the ballad meter is there, blank verse is there, ode, lyric, sonnet. So we have various stanza forms, and we have also the revival of many great masters. For example, Milton was revived. Wordsworth wrote a poem on Milton called To Milton. So this we have variety of stanza forms, and also the renewal of the old writers, especially the writers of 16th and 17th century. In 18th century, the writers actually went to the classical writers for the inspiration, but here we have the revival of 16th and 17th century writers. So this is in brief the important features of Romantic poetry. Thank you very much.